China's betraying Russia. Yes, you heard that right. Beijing masterfully pretends to be a partner, but in reality, it uses Moscow as the weak link. And
in our country, there's a phrase that has become a saying. Russians and Chinese are brothers forever. But
here's what's interesting. Recently, Xi spoke on the phone with Trump and stated that he supports the US peace efforts regarding the resolution of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. It sounds nice in words, but what about in practice?
I think that China has sent a political signal to the United States, indicating that it is closely watching what is happening in terms of the peace process and the search for peaceful solutions in the Russia-Ukraine war. The main points of this signal should be as follows. Russia must not, under any circumstances, win this war, and accordingly, it is crucial that Ukraine must not lose.
But here's something else. The leaders of the countries have agreed on visits, and Trump is planning to go to China as early as April.
Whether Trump will be able to reach the desired trade agreement with China, specifically in April, for example, during a potential meeting in Beijing, is a big question. Nothing deeper than that, in my opinion, especially regarding the end of the Russia-Ukraine war. There is nothing about these dates, April 2026, a meeting between Xi Jinping and Trump in Beijing, that goes beyond that. But
what exactly is China doing wrong in relation to Russia? It seems like everything is fine. But the thing is, China is making a lot of money off Russia. The prices of export goods supplied to Russia have increased by an average of 87%.
Relations between Russia and China have always been very complicated. And if we think they're friends, no, there's actually a good word for this. They're fellow travelers. Russia and China are fellow travelers. A weak Russia is beneficial to China, a weak Putin is beneficial to China. It's advantageous for China to buy raw materials cheaply and then sell goods to the Russian Federation at a very high price. Russia basically has no other way out anymore.
And it's not just about goods. China is gradually moving into Russian regions, thereby gaining access to territories and resources.
You know, there are already examples in the Far East where small settlements have become predominantly Chinese, and now they even participate in municipal elections there.
Russia, in turn, is becoming increasingly dependent on China.
And does Putin find such a relationship acceptable? Again, of course not. Of course he doesn't. Well, because Putin has phantom pains about the Soviet Union, basically throughout his presidency he has tried to restore some kind of former greatness. He calls himself the gatherer of Russian lands. But in reality, he is simply leading the Russian Federation to ruin, to complete absolute ruin, to financial bankruptcy.
Beijing is increasingly strengthening its influence in Central Asia while pushing Moscow into the background, which likely cannot help but worry the old man in the Kremlin. It is necessary
to unwaveringly strengthen the friendship between China and Kazakhstan, to make joint efforts to promote comprehensive cooperation, and to contribute more to peace in the region and the world, as well as to the development of stability and positive energy in Chinese-Kazakh relations.
Here is the main question. What exactly drives China? Is it a true partnership with Russia?
our close and ongoing communication clearly reflects the deeply strategic nature of Russian-Chinese relations, which are currently at an unprecedentedly high level.
Or is Beijing simply taking advantage of the situation and acting in its own interests?
They are not interested in the Russian Federation winning this war. Because if Putin wins this war, then he restores his geopolitical agency. He starts talking to all the players, for example, with the United States and China on an equal footing, which is absolutely not in line with China's strategic interests. Yes, this position is covert.
China talks about friendship, but only acts when it benefits them. It profits from Russia, strengthens its own influence, and at the same time builds relations with the US. And Moscow is becoming increasingly dependent on Beijing's decisions. Russia is losing the Far East, not officially, but in reality.
The Far East, without any exaggeration, has become the most important factor in strengthening Russia's position in the world. Our flagship in the new global economic reality.
While the Kremlin is preoccupied with the war, the region is being divided among China and North Korea.
I would call it a kind of creeping takeover, creeping migration. For now, of course, control over the Far East still remains in Moscow's hands, but there are more and more Chinese there, and they are playing an increasingly significant role in the economy. But as they say, today they play a major role in the economy, and tomorrow they'll play a major role in politics.
More than 1 trillion rubles in investments from China sounds like aid, but it's all centered around trade, not the development of the region.
China needs to use Russian resources on the cheap, and accordingly they will have that opportunity. And that's why I think this economic dependence of these regions on China will only continue to grow increasingly and significantly over time.
Also, the Chinese have long ceased to be guests in Russia.
Vladivostok is simply unnecessary. It should just be given to the Chinese. The Chinese can simply come in and no one here will resist. There will be no one to resist and nothing to resist with.
According to various estimates, up to 2 million people live between Vladivostok and the Urals.
This is called settling these territories with Chinese people and in various forms. This includes both migrants themselves as well as mixed marriages, from which children are born. And accordingly, these regions are becoming more and more closely tied to China.
Now about North Korea. In the Far East, just in the past year, more than 15,000 North Koreans have officially arrived and unofficially up to 50,000. And that's not the limit yet. A total of 153,000 new labor contracts have already been ordered.
There is a shortage of labor in Russia today because so many people have been killed in the war. And accordingly, demographic problems still remain. So yes, there aren't enough of our own people. And in this sense, North Korea is an excellent supplier of labor resources because the people are disciplined and accordingly know how to march in formation in every sense of the word.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
So it turns out that Moscow has handed over the region for temporary use. But why is that?
Putin needs them. People whom, as he sees it, are easy to control, it doesn't matter. Even if not by himself, but through others. That's why he's confident that these people won't start a revolution, won't protest against Moscow's actions. He thinks these are very convenient people, and it would be good if Russia were populated by just such convenient people, because with his own people, things might not work out so well.
But everything comes at a price. And the longer the Kremlin turns a blind eye, the more important the question becomes. Who is really running the Far East?
In reality, today, of course, Russia can be considered as essentially a vassal of China, which China primarily uses to put pressure on Europe, especially in various political and economic ways. And we understand that a global confrontation does exist, of course. Not between Russia and NATO, but rather between China and the United States, as well as between China and Europe. In this particular case, today's Russia is very much like a loyal guard dog that faithfully obeys its master's every single command.
So what happens next? Could the Far East still return to Moscow's real control, or is it the other way around? The influence of China and North Korea will only continue to grow.
The influence of China and North Korea will only increase. And accordingly, China itself will decide whether it needs to formally take all of this under its control. Or perhaps for now, it's enough to have, let's say, complete economic control today, and tomorrow that will become complete political control.
It seems that while Putin is focused on seizing other people's territories, he is gradually losing his own. And ironically, these territories are being taken not by enemies, but by the Kremlin's own allies.
A truce or the calm before the storm. China has announced the suspension of an additional 24% tariff on American goods. This relief will last for a year. At the same time, the basic 10% tariff, which was introduced in response to a similar tariff imposed by Trump in April, remains in place.
The US is the largest market for goods. China is the largest producer of goods. How does China make money? By supplying its products to the largest markets. As we noted, the US is the primary one.
The apparent agreement was reached after a meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, according to Reuters. As a result, tariffs of up to 15% on certain types of agricultural products from the US have also been lifted.
From an economic standpoint, China and the US cannot really be, let's say, not just in different camps, but actual adversaries. In fact, they are in different camps, essentially, because they are competing over which of them is the leading economy. And
China's Ministry of Finance noted that starting March 4th, they will suspend all tariffs on soybeans and other U.S. agricultural products, including corn, wheat, sorghum, and chicken. It was stated that the decision was made in accordance with the consensus reached during economic and trade consultations between China and the U.S.
therefore, despite all the political ambitions and attempts to show that we can compete, that we will be leaders and so on, when it comes to the economy based on China's economic interests, it needs the U.S.
The U.S. and China have also agreed to establish direct communication between their armed forces. As stated by Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth, this will help prevent potential conflicts between the countries. Another step China has taken towards the U.S. is its refusal to import Russian oil. According to Bloomberg, major state-owned companies and smaller private enterprises in China have canceled nearly half of their oil shipments from Russia after the U.S. imposed sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil in October. And
when the question arises of whom China will choose, Russia or the US, one must understand a simple thing. There is the US, and one of its states, the largest, is California. And California's economy is equal to 2 Russian economies. One state of the United States is like 2 economies of the Russian Federation. Naturally, for China, the US is much more important than Russia.
Putin absolutely does not want to lose one of his few remaining partners, so he sent his prime minister with greetings to Beijing. As a result of the negotiations, the parties signed about 10 documents on cooperation in the fields of energy, space, and high technology.
Russia is of interest to China as a supplier of raw materials and goods. But Russia doesn't really have much choice except to sell everything to China. China understands that Russia depends on it and that Russia won't take any steps against it. And with America, it's interesting because it's a sales market.
According to Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service, Russia is sinking ever deeper into economic dependence on China. Raw material projects in the Far East and Siberia are turning the region into a resource base for China. Meanwhile, local communities are left out of the promised benefits.